Welcome everyone to week 2 of beroepsopdracht 4, heading towards beroepsopdracht 4b, and this is all about test question construction or assessment construction. There we go. So hopefully you've looked at the videos that were part of the preparation for this lesson, and you will have encountered a few of these particular definitions before. So the quality of a test has everything to do with the validity. So a great test is valid, which means does it actually measure what I intended to measure? So if I'd like to measure or assess, for instance, speaking fluency, should I give them a sit-down grammar test? Probably not, because you're actually not testing what you intend to test. Another thing that's very important for the quality of a test is the reliability of a test. In the video, it is explained that a test or a testing instrument should more or less give you the same results every time you use it. So a great test should be, as much as possible, be reliable. So every time you measure with this particular test, it should give you more or less the same results. Then two other issues with testing are the transparency. So a test should be very transparent for the pupil and for the student. So it needs to be very clear how a grade is obtained, what needs to be done to actually pass this test. And the fourth one, very important, it needs to be practical. It needs to be practical for the teacher to administer. It needs to be able, we need to not get a burnout because we have this wonderfully valid, reliable, and transparent test. And it takes us an hour per student to actually take this test. So these four elements are always very important when you try to create a test. So a little bit more about practicality for the teacher and the transparency for the pupil. The two other terms are more explained in the video that I'd like you to watch for this week. So the practicality is very much about how much time does it take to mark the test and to administer the test. If you feel like I'm taking this, I've created this test and I'd like to test fluency, and it is very valid because it is actually testing fluency because I sit down with my students for an hour and discuss with them many different topics. And then I have someone sitting next to me to make it more reliable. So there's two people sitting down with one student for an hour. It makes it very valid. It makes it very reliable. But does it make it practical? Not really. We can't really do that with as many students as we have, for instance. Then the transparency, so the grading information, how do I obtain my actual grade? How do I need to perform? How do I get to this test? How do I do this particular test? And the instructions need to be very clear and transparent for the students. We're going to give you a few examples of how to do this for both speaking and writing, because we're discussing mostly assessing productive skills today. And the productive skills, as you know, are speaking assignments and writing assignments. So marking these and giving feedback can be a little bit tricky. So let's discuss. Marking speaking or assessing speaking has a few difficulties. And again, we need to point towards reliability, validity, and practicality, because it's very hard to assess speaking objectively. It might be just that you are doing the speaking test one-on-one with one of your students who just misbehaved in your classroom. Try to be objective, try to be kind, and really listen to the language level at that point. It's very hard. It's also very hard to stick to the validity of a test, because what happens very often is that we intend to assess fluency, for instance, speaking fluency, and we are presented with a rubric or with criteria of assessment that deal with, for instance, grammar or spelling or coherency, which basically they're testing accuracy rather than fluency at this point. So when are you actually testing speaking skills and fluency? Could it be that you should be testing or looking for communicative success rather than how accurate things are said? And then speaking tests are highly impractical because you really need to listen to one of your students speaking if you'd like to assess their fluency or their speaking skills, and it takes a lot of time. So these 3 issues are part of speaking assessment and make it very difficult. So let's look at a few of these. So a few types of spoken tests out there, this is taken from Thornbury, are very common ones. So you have interviews, which is you have the teacher and one candidate sitting down, for instance, discussing a book or an article that was read, or maybe their hobbies or something else. So an interview, which is back and forth interaction. Another very common one are live monologues or presentations in front of a group or in small groups, but these are very rehearsed utterances. So these, you're actually testing something else. You need to be very clear about this. So if you're doing an interview one-on-one, you're also testing if somebody can problem solve, if they can use strategies, if they can ask for help or assistance, if they ask for clarification during an interview. When you make them do a live monologue, there's a lot of time to prepare. So we're testing something else here. We're testing if they are well prepared very often, or if they were well rehearsed their spoken English. Then another thing, which is more practical than a live presentation, is a recorded presentation. Again, however, this is a very rehearsed way of speaking. So you have to consider the validity. Am I still testing what I intend to test here? Another one that's very common is role plays. So very often in the form of language village these days, or drama or roles given to students. In this case, 2 students are actually discussing with each other, or they are performing a role that is not their they're not speaking from themselves, but they're actually in a role. So they might be, the butcher and a customer, and they have to order 3 sausages, something like that could be considered a role play. This has a few advantages, but also disadvantages. The advantages could be actually that they're outside of themselves and they don't see, they feel more free to speak because it's not them making the mistakes. They are this odd butcher guy in this role. And the other way around as well. And then we have collaborative tasks or debates. So there's a group discussion and you need to take turns and you need to make sure that you're part of this discussion. All of these types of spoken tests that are out there, you have to consider, what am I testing here? How should I be testing this? How can I make this as practical as possible? There's a question for you here, and I will include this in the video as well, so you have to answer these. So when you start assessing speaking tests, it's hard. So there's 2 ways of assessing this, and this could be a holistic scoring, which is you go an overall score for the overall impression of the speaking performance. You feel like this person has done well enough and they have a 7. And then we have analytic scoring, and you give separate scores for different aspects of the task. Please check out, there is a very detailed description in both the CEFR document that you were supposed to read for this week and the video that I've uploaded on how to create an analytic scoring device called a rubric. And you will find out what a rubric is as well, because it has everything to do, again, with validity and reliability of how you score speaking. So the useful information for how to create a rubric to try to up the validity and the reliability of speaking assessment can be found in these two sources. So the CEFR and the detailed video that is uploaded here. What is also important with speaking is how to give feedback, because somebody is right in front of you and you need to do something with things that you pick up on. How do you give feedback on speaking? Well, usually these rules apply, so you need to be very prompt. It could be useful during tasks, etc., to actually gather all the mistakes that you hear from many different students and address it later on. However, if it's on one-on-one, it's also useful to be very prompt, closely following the event, so not leaving a week in between, for instance. I would not say that you do it immediately after hear a mistake, or especially not, because that has everything to do with speaking confidence. It should contain encouragement. You did a really good job. You really tried to get there. However, I misunderstood you at a certain point because this word was used instead of this word. You need to be very specific about why something was good or why something was not up to standard and what the student can do about it. So feedback should have an assignment almost in it. It needs to give pointers to how to improve, mainly addressing the fact that something was incorrect. It usually doesn't help anyone. Try to not focus on too many different aspects at the same time. Try to address the most important one, and you can really assess what is important by thinking about what hinders communication. If he would say it like this, for instance, it would hinder my communication, rather than it doesn't sound very pretty, or and you need to be very clear about it. Don't beat around the bush, just say it. A few techniques to give feedback is, for instance, the sandwich method, which is that you say something positive first, then you give the encouraged feedback, or feed forward rather, and say something positive again. It could also be that you start with a question and then an encouragement, or you give tips and tops, maybe let peers give tips and tops, you yourself as well. I'm sorry. How do I get to the pause? So in conclusion, how do we keep up the quality of a test? Well, again, the transparency, practicality with that as well, the validity and the reliability. A few examples that were given, and hopefully that you've read or you've watched in the videos that were presented to you, are the following. A rubric. A rubric can definitely help you to give transparent information about a test or an assessment. Students know how they will be assessed. They know what levels they can achieve. They know how to improve their levels, hopefully, through a rubric. And you need to discuss it before the assessment, not during the assessment. So the grading information is present on the test, which is definitely there if you use a rubric. It could be that you give an example test. So who's done, if you show this is done before like this, it can help. It makes it very transparent. Testing at the right level ups the validity. And you need to make sure that whatever you're testing is aligned with the activities that you've actually done with them in the preceding lessons. If you've only discussed grammar and then all of a sudden they have a speaking test, it doesn't help with the validity and nor the constructive alignment. The reliability is upped when you have more than one assessor or more than one moment to test the skill and you use an answer sheet.